Hey, what's going on, everyone? So I'll wait a minute or two for people to jump in and then rock and roll. Um, we'll start a little bit early. Let me see. Share it to the group too. Cool. Okay, perfect. Okay, cool. All right, you guys. So I wanted to talk today about how to optimize your nutrition protocol. I know there's a lot of confusion there. So I'm going to go over various details of how to go about setting up your own nutrition program on this call today, on this live today. Now, the most important thing to remember is whenever taking advice from people online, you have to remember, like, I never met any of you individually. And the thing is, the individual differences make the big difference. And everyone is going to be slightly different regarding their goal, their starting place, what they're able to do, etc., etc. So make sure when you are seeking advice online, it's mainly just as a general reference and not as an exactly like go-to plan of what to do. Okay, so I'm going to kind of reference this from the vantage point of like what I would do personally, and some things you can consider when approaching a nutrition program. But you have basically two options in developing your own nutrition program, and that's becoming your own mechanic, or just hiring like a nutritionist or registered dietitian or holistic health coach, etc., etc. But I'm at least going to give you the variables here of what you would need to focus on and concentrate on. Okay, so saw a few people jumped in, so hope you guys are doing well. Hope your weekend is going well as well. Let me know if you guys have any questions as well. I will be more than happy to answer them, and that's why I actually do these lives. So if you guys have any questions, just drop them in the comments section, and I'll be happy to answer it. So regarding nutrition goals, I mean, the first step you have to do, Hani, good to see you. Hopefully I pronounced your name right. The first step you guys have to do is determine your goals. And that's like so important because that sets the foundation to what you need to focus on. So is your goal fat loss? Is your goal weight gain? Maybe you're trying to maintain. Or is your goal maybe maintenance, but you're also a mountain climber and you want to have great endurance for climbing mountains? Or are you sitting at a computer all day? Or are you doing construction work all day? All of these things are going to determine how you need to set up your nutrition protocol. That's why it's tough, like following advice online when people start giving out absolute answers, like just do this or just do that. That's already kind of like a red flag, because imagine going to a doctor's office and you don't even speak to them and they don't even know your situation, but they're like, here, take this medication. So obviously that would strike you as a little bit odd. And it's the same thing when taking advice online. Even if you find a very competent person, that doesn't mean they actually know your situation. So a lot of times if they're giving out good information, you could also easily just take that information out of context, okay? So please remember that. So the first step is you want to determine what your goals are. And let's say you want to lose weight. So that will give you a specific caloric range depending on your body weight and what you need to eat to be able to lose weight. So inevitably, you're going to need to establish a caloric deficit to lose weight. You're going to need to establish a caloric maintenance level to be able to maintain your weight. And if you're trying to gain weight, you need to establish a caloric surplus. If you're very like muscular ready and already extremely physically active, you're going to be able to eat a lot more calories and, for example, be still in a caloric surplus than someone that's working for example, like a computer job, and they're kind of sitting for 8 to 10 hours a day. So their activity level isn't going to be quite high as compared to like a construction worker, for example. So the calorie ranges will differ from person to person, and it's important to determine how much lean muscle mass you have, how much physical activity you have, and then also physical activity in terms of your workouts, and then also how much physical activity you actually do at work as well. All of those things are important to consider, okay? So that's going to be step two. So step one is be crystal clear on your goals, on what you're trying to actually achieve, and that's going to help set the foundation for how many calories you need per day. And the second step would be to determine that caloric range. The third step, what you want to consider is now since you know how many calories you need, excuse me, now since you know how many calories you need per day, now your next step is to determine how many of those calories come from proteins, fats, and carbs. So those are the three macronutrient molecules you want to be focused on. And again, this is going to be determined on the person's goal, okay? So if a person is like a very lean individual that's very muscular and they're doing like high endurance activities, they're going to need a tremendous amount of carbohydrates. Or if they're lean and muscular and actually trying to gain muscle or trying to improve their 1 rep max in the gym or something of that sort, or trying to have a lot of glycogen in their muscles so their muscle looks like it has more density and volume. So their carbohydrates requirements are going to be quite high. Where if you're getting like an obese person, for example, that's not physically active, that doesn't have good gym intensity, their training age isn't quite high, and also their muscle mass is quite low. So for individuals of that sort, and there's a lot of nuance here too, there are no absolutes, but for individuals of that sort, they would probably benefit tremendously from being on a low carb diet for a large portion of their fat loss journey. But then when they transition into a muscle gain journey or a lifestyle program, they would want to introduce those carbohydrates from like healthier carbohydrates like fruit, starchy vegetables like potatoes, etc., oatmeal, things of that sort. I love steel cut oats. They taste amazing. I mostly eat organic potatoes, a large variety of them. The larger the variety, the better, but things of that sort. So, and if for protein, for example, let's say you are trying to lose weight, one of the obstacles of losing weight is inevitably, if you're not careful, you also lose muscle as well. So you want to reduce the amount of muscle loss during a fat loss journey. And ideally, if you structure everything correctly and you have proper rest intervals and adequate, great periodized programs, and allow enough biological resilience and adaptation, recovery, etc., you could structure things differently. But you want, for example, you could actually even gain a little bit of muscle during a fat loss phase, maybe 2 to 3 pounds, and losing 20 to 30 pounds of body fat, for example. So you might not even lose any body fat, especially if you're new to lifting weights, or maybe you've taken a tremendous amount of time off from weightlifting because of one reason or another, maybe an injury, and then you start weightlifting again, but you also need to lose weight. You will probably gain actually a few pounds of muscle while losing 20 or 30 pounds of excess body fat, okay? So having said that, with how you structure things, let's say you're trying to preserve muscle tissue, the general rule is for your protein intake, you want anywhere from 0.8 to 1, sometimes people say as high as 1.2 grams of protein per pound of body weight, okay? And that's going to help you preserve that muscle tissue and also give you the amino acids necessary to train with a lot of intensity, etc. So those are the three things, right? We want to determine our goal. That's going to set how much actual calories we need. We want to determine then our caloric range. If you're trying to lose weight, you need to be in a caloric surplus. If you're trying to gain weight, caloric deficit. If you're trying to gain weight, you need to be in a caloric surplus, okay? And if you're trying to maintain, then you need to find a caloric maintenance level. And then the third thing is you want to determine how to distribute your protein, carbs, and fats. And again, that's going to vary tremendously depending on what kind of sports you're playing, or if you're just going to the gym, how active your job is. Are you a computer scientist, or are you, for example, a construction worker? All of these things are going to dictate what the ideal fats, carbs, and proteins are. And the reason I'm saying it this way, guys, is, see, there are no absolutes with nutrition advice. So whenever you're following stuff online, keep that in mind. If someone is saying just do this without even knowing your situation or your starting place, that's already a red flag. Maybe at best that can provide some ideas that you could investigate further and see if it's right for you. But there's a lot of nuance in nutrition, and there's a reason people spend many, many years studying this subject to provide proper coaching for people. It's not as easy as just be vegan or just do a carnivore diet. or just eat paleo, or just do fasting. If it was unfortunate, if it was that easy, and a lot of people have done these diets, America right now is more obese than ever. So clearly something's not working right. It could also be they're approaching the problem at the wrong level. So with weight loss clients, for example, oftentimes there is an education factor to it as well, but oftentimes it's a problem at the emotional thinking dimension that leads to certain behavior patterns that lead to excess weight, and then that excess weight causes a tremendous amount of inflammation in the body, which lead to various health issues over time for the majority of people. But there are some, maybe 10% of obese people that have completely perfect blood work too. So it varies depending on your genetics and various life circumstances that are tough to measure. Okay. So another thing you can do is you can get something like a GI map test, and it's a stool test you can order, and they ship this test to your house. They have various companies that do this. I don't get any kickbacks from this. This is just something I use, and they ship a stool test to your house, and then you ship the sample back to a lab, and then they give you a good analysis on how healthy your gut microbiome is, like if you have any bacterial overgrowths, fungal overgrowths, maybe any parasites. All three of those are quite common in the population, and probably, I forgot the exact numbers, but probably 80% of people have at least some kind of bacterial, fungal, or parasite overgrowth in their gut that's going to impact what kind of foods you eat or how you break those foods down. And thus, that's going to impact your entire biology and psychology eventually as well, okay? It'll also be able to give you a good overview of how well your pancreas is doing with producing the proper enzymes, and how well it's able to actually break those foods down, et cetera, et cetera. So is it a super must? Maybe it's not like 100% must, but it would be great if you're trying to take out the guesswork and go into more detail in terms of how to customize a nutrition program specifically for you. That's important because remember, nature is a novelty generator. So everyone is going to be, thank you, Oscar. Just got it a few days ago. I appreciate it. So everyone is going to be different. Nature is a novelty generator, right? There are no same 2 grains of sand on the planet. There are no same 2 leaves in the same tree even, okay? The same thing with humans. Every human is different. Their digestion is different. There are 12 systems in the human body. Everyone's health in each system is different and variable, and it all impacts the digestive system eventually because all of these systems are intertwined and they all work together. Like my mentor, Paul Chek, would say, like, what part of a watch gives you the time? Like the whole entire thing. The whole watch tells you the time, and if any one part in the watch breaks, then you're not going to get the accurate time, or it's just not going to work, If like the little glass is broken, then eventually the watch is going to break because it doesn't have a cover, et cetera, et cetera. So Rob is asking, I've heard of people doing stool tests to hone in on which probiotic to take specifically. Yes, that's true. You can do that as well. And it also actually gives you which antibiotics you're resistant to as well. So hopefully you don't have to use antibiotics, that's a last resort. But if you do, it could help you pick ones that are actually going to work for you. Because if you're resistant to some and you happen to take those, then it's probably not going to work for you, So yes, it could do that as well. It could help customize your probiotic use. Also, again, which antibiotics do work for your system and which don't, so you can be more selective there. Okay, so GI Map, again, there's so many of these companies. I'm not getting anything from this company here. It's just what I use personally. And you could also, with this company, then book a call with like a registered dietitian to go over the results with you. That's an option for you too, okay? So once you determine your goal, once you determine your calorie range, your macros, you possibly got a GI map to further customize your nutrition program even more and really home in on the details. Another thing to consider is food sourcing, right? And there's a lot that goes into this too, but I'm going to cover it briefly here, so at least you guys know which aspects to focus on. So first of all, you got the proteins, right? Now, what options do we have for proteins? So one, let's just stick to the whole food, not the grocery store, but whole food as in like the steak, chicken items for now, because I'm hoping you guys stay away from processed food altogether, okay? I never eat processed food. I would highly recommend nobody eats processed food, ideally. There are some super rare circumstances with people with terrible digestion that could benefit from more like liquid vitamin, mineral, and protein type shakes, just to actually be able to eat the adequate amount and possibly absorb those nutrients, etc. But outside of that, I mean, I think in my opinion, the majority of people should not be eating any processed food at all, period, and just sticking to whole food in its whole state. It's oversimplified when you say this, but there is a little bit of credibility to it. Just stick to single ingredient foods, okay? Again, oversimplified, there are no absolutes, but like if on the back of the label, it should just say beef, or it should just say chicken, or it should just say apple, or it should just say almond, or whatever you choose. It shouldn't say like almond plus like 50 other ingredients, half of which are tough to pronounce, and then they got like red dye 60 or whatever, and a lot of the ingredients are like numbers, they're not even words, okay? So you want to stay away from those, in my opinion, just in a long enough time frame. They'll prove that those things cause digestive issues and possibly various cancers. You know, like half of Americans develop cancer in their lifetime, okay? That's a tremendous amount, and half of them die from it. So like next time it's the weekend, you go to lunch with your friends, let's say it's you and 3 other people. I mean, half of you are getting cancer from it, and 1 of you is dying from it out of those 4. So that's startling, okay? And a lot of that, it used to be thought like, oh, cancer is all genetics, and they're like 90% of it is genetics. Then they changed the ratios, then like 50%, and now they presume 90% of all cancers are actually due to poor lifestyle and nutritional variables that are done through a very long period of time. Christian, what is going on? Good to see you. Okay, so 90%. There's some, well, again, no absolutes. There are going to be some abnormalities, you know, but if you just really dial in on eating whole food, you know, staying away from processed food, keeping your body fat at a reasonable level, let's say for males, 10 to 15%. I like to see it at 10 to 12%, but even 10 to 15% is great. That's it. I mean, you reduce your chances, probably it's safe to say, by developing all cancers by probably 90% or more, you know? So let's go over in terms of sourcing proteins, right? You got the factory farmed beef, chicken, pork, aquaponic fish, you know, farmed fish. So those are all options. Are they great options? Overall, they are actually great options. They're not options I eat because a lot of those factory farmed meats, for example, are enclosed in a huge facility, right? And when animals can't roam free on pasture and eat food, food has to be brought to them. And typically the food that's brought to them are, you know, genetically modified corn and soy and other grain variants that are not only genetically modified through transgenesis, it's not even a natural form of genetic modification, but they're also heavily sprayed with things like Roundup or atrazine. Look up these 2 herbicides, okay? They're part of a pesticide class. And you will see a tremendous amount of this stuff is used on the corn that is grown, on the soy, etc., and a myriad of other chemicals. A lot of these chemicals, actually all of them, are never tested for safety as a complete formulation either, okay? So the federal bodies require chemical companies just to test the isolated active ingredient in isolation on its own and never the complete product. So like when you go to Home Depot and you see like a herbicide spray, you think as a consumer, okay, they tested this whole thing for safety. They sprayed it on something and then determined it was like safe at a certain level. But it's not the case. They never use the complete product. They just, in every product, you could look at the back of the label and you will see there are active ingredients and a bunch of inactive ingredients that are usually never even on the label. They just say inactive ingredients like 90% of the formulation, but they kind of put it under like a proprietary blend, so that it's very even difficult to find out all the ingredients in there. But my point being is, like, for example, with Roundup, which is the #1 used herbicide per pound used per year in the US, it's found in all rainwater, Roundup is found in pretty much 95% of male sperm, blood, in urine samples. Okay, I think in 2015 it was classified by the World Health Organization as a type 2 carcinogen. Okay, there's a lot of controversy about this herbicide. You guys can check it out on YouTube. A tremendous amount of information on there. I think pretty soon it's going to be 100% illegal in the US, but they're still spraying it heavily. There are about 750 different formulations of Roundup. The majority of them, if not all of them, are banned in Western Europe, or they had to alter the formulation a tremendous amount, but they're being used here all the time. Okay, same with atrazine, and there are so many other chemicals being used too. So keep in mind that those crops are being sprayed heavily with all these chemicals and then fed to animals, and then they bioaccumulate in the animal tissue, mostly the fat, but you do still find it in the urine. You'll find it in the urine for sure, but mostly the fat, but you still find it in the muscle tissue and the organ tissue as well. So it's present throughout the whole entire animal. And then obviously as it bioaccumulates, they're large animals, especially like pigs, cattle, for example, beef. So as they eat that stuff, which they eat a tremendous amount of it a day, it accumulates in their tissue, and then you end up eating that stuff, and it accumulates in your tissue. Other things to consider with factory farm stuff, antibiotics are heavily used, beta agonists, steroids, GMOs, all sorts of different biocides. Sometimes they're sprayed directly on the animal, et cetera, especially in fish farming. Pesticides and antibiotics are sprayed directly on the animals, but they're also antibiotics are given in the feed, et cetera, in the water as well. So whatever they eat end up being part of the nutritional profile of the animal, and then you end up eating that. And if you're eating that, 2 to 3 times a day, plus, drinking out of plastic, plus eating out often, where they cook a lot of the food with industrial seed oils, it all adds up. You have a tremendous toxic load, and a lot of these chemicals, like atrazine, for example, cause aromatase. So they convert your testosterone to estrogen. So all of a sudden now your estrogen goes through the roof, and you notice that fat gain is quite easy. It comes on very quickly. Your sex drive may be low. You start developing more like feminine type qualities, like more fat tissue around the lower chest, the midsection, the butt area, inner thighs, etc., etc. These days, the average American, probably in their early 20s, has a total testosterone of probably 300 to 500 nanograms per deciliter, which is very low. Are they due to all these chemicals? The chemicals do play a part. A large part of it is also, people being inactive, disconnected from nature, not being physically active in general. Their body fat may be too high, which also increases the estrogen of the individual as well in males, for example, etc. So I try to stay away from the factory farm stuff to reduce my exposure to all of those other things. So we got a few questions. Aren't cancerous cells activated by high pH level and acidity in the body? Christian, that's a good question. I don't know. I know as body fat increases, inflammation is going to increase tremendously in the body, and that actually increases your chances of various cancers, as well as various other diseases and orthopedic issues like low back pain. When the weight gets to a certain threshold, people start developing a lot of ankle and knee pain and hip pain as well. There's a lot of shear and torsion and compression loading on all the joints of the lower extremities especially. So if the person's movement isn't very pristine, there's a lot more penalties for those bad movement patterns. So their passive tissue breaks down much faster, like the intervertebral discs. The L5S1 disc in the lower back is very commonly injured. It's actually the #1 orthopedic injury in the US. So it happens very often, and it doesn't have to. But when you combine being overweight and not having good spine hygiene, or being conscious of movement, or being educated in that, and it does require education. It doesn't come naturally. Like I had to go through various schooling to learn that. It's not like I knew it myself. But all that stuff would help decrease the loading on the joints and stuff of that sort. So with protein, The next option to avoid a lot of those biocides and stuff like that is you can buy at least organic. And does organic cover absolutely everything? Does the organic certification program in the US have some gaps? Yeah, it does. But it's much better in various ways than the factory farmed meat, for example. And some people would say like, oh, organic uses pesticides too. And I think it's important to distinguish that pesticides are always a last resort. Pesticides are kind of like, you can view them as like antibiotics, you know? You don't just use antibiotics all year round. You use it when you kind of desperately need it because of some infection or something of that sort, where you're trying to maybe kill some kind of bug in your stomach. And you don't want to be using it all the time. It's always as the last resort. And in organic, certified organic farms, in real organic farms, they really don't use biocides. But if they do, it's like soap and water, you know, soap mixed with water, or vinegar, you know, mixed with water. Vinegar is the stuff you use to clean your vegetables, for example, or spray on your salad. Another thing that can happen is they could do what's referred to as companion planting. So you kind of plant complementary plants next to each other, and each plant helps fend off typical pests of another plant, etc., etc. Mulching is very common. A lot of biodiversity in your crop selection will help decrease the amount of pests, if not eliminate them completely. Because you guys remember, if you have healthy soil, if it's done legitimate organic, you have strong crops. And when you have strong crops, pests don't attack strong crops. Pests are nature's way of getting rid of weak crops. So when you have weak soil, nutrient deficient soil, the soil food web is destroyed because of a lot of chemicals, a lot of biocides being sprayed on these crops. That's gonna have a upward effect. So now the root system of the plant doesn't have nutrients to attain, and it's not like an animal that could just go on another pasture and find food there. It's stuck in that area with its root system, and it relies on kind of the rhizosphere and a certain ratio of bacteria and fungi that's going to vary from plant to plant to basically feed sugars into the soil, which attract the soil food web, like a whole bunch of different bugs and nutrients. And all of this soil food web is what works together to produce nutrient dense crops that are healthy. And with industrial farming, especially with monocropping and a lot of spraying, that food web is killed, so the plant doesn't have the nutrients it needs, so it becomes weak. And the nature's way of getting weak plants is send in the pests. And then industrial's farming way of getting rid of pests is spray more chemicals. But those cycles only happen so much, because the more chemicals you spray, the weaker the soil becomes, thus the weaker the plants become next season, and thus you got to spray more and more and more, and eventually the soil becomes just dirt, and you can't quite grow anything on it at that point. And that's kind of concerning, because if you look at an apple, for example, and you shave off like 70% of the apple, you have about like 30%, that's the ocean, 70%, right? So you got 30% land. But remember, you could only farm in certain types of land. You can't quite farm everywhere. So when you take that out, you really have only about 15% of the Earth's surface that's able to be farmed for food. And you have to take into consideration that large metropolitan areas are always built on the most fertile of grounds, right? So when you take out those metropolitan areas, you really have only about 8% of the world's surface that can be used for farming, okay? So, and that 8% has been depleted heavily due to industrial farming, which, contrary to popular belief, isn't required to feed the world. It's very inefficient, actually. It creates a tremendous amount of pollution. And because of the politics of the food system and the large amount of consolidation, it actually causes more hunger throughout the world. And in fact, even to this day, 70% of people in the whole entire world still get their food from like a local farm source. They don't get it from like a grocery store, like a factory farm type of environment, okay? So they're living somehow and prospering quite well. And a lot of the countries where you do see famine, it's mostly due to kind of war or for political monetary reasons. It's not due that they can't quite provide their own food. There's a lot that goes into that conversation though. So the next option you have is like pasture raised. I try to buy this, you know, so pasture raised beef, chicken, pork as well, if you're into it. one thing I would definitely avoid in the factory farm situation is like pork and farmed fish personally, but it's up to you. Okay. So some websites where you can find legitimate pasture-raised meats are AmericanGrassFed.org. Just check out this website, scroll to the bottom of the website, you see an interactive map. And just click on that map and you will see a bunch of American grass-fed certified ranches. So the AGA certification logo is basically the gold standard for grass-fed certification because it's not like a regulated phrase, right? So anyone can kind of quite put that on there and it could get a little bit deceptive because someone can say grass-fed. Okay, well, all cattle are grass-fed, but the majority, all cattle are actually legitimately grass-fed for like 85% of their life, but 99% of them are sent to a feedlot where they're fed heavy amounts of grain for the last bit of their life, and that's not their natural diet. Cattle's, their species-specific diet is that of a herbivore. So they eat grass and other forage and stuff of that sort. They're not meant to be fed grains, and they get sick quite quickly when they're fed grains, which is why antibiotics need to be used heavily in those type of factory farmed operations, etc., etc. But when you feed them a non-species specific diet, the nutritional profile is not as good as when they're fed a species specific diet. So something to consider. So another website is forceofnature.com. Amazing website. They have actually a lot of their products in the frozen section at Whole Foods too, but you could order from their website. And another one for fish, all wild fish are great at any grocery store. So if they have wild fish options at a grocery store, that's an amazing choice. But if you want to go online, if you don't have it in your area, you can have vitalchoice.com. So the cool thing about all of these websites that I listed, and there are many, many more, is if you live in kind of like this food desert, you have the option of ordering from these companies and they deliver directly to you. And also remember, in food deserts, you do have like pretty much a Walmart in the area where you can drive to. And they do sell a lot of organic produce and a good selection of meats if you kind of look. It's not going to be like every single thing, right? It's Walmart, but if you do want to be a picky shopper, you do have the choice to do that even in a food desert. And if you want to order from these companies, I don't get any affiliates, it's just where I order from. You can order from them, they deliver directly to you. So the third option for protein is kind of like wild game. You know, a lot of people aren't going to become hunters, so they can go to forceofnature.com and they sell elk, wild boar, and deer there, among other products. But those are good ones. They also sell grass-fed and finished bison, grass-fed and finished beef, etc., etc. So, okay, so some protein options. Egg whites are also an amazing protein option as well, or just eggs in general. So carb options. Fruit, fruit is great. Starchy vegetables like potatoes and stuff like that are amazing. Again, I try to avoid the non-organic ones because they're just sprayed heavily and there's no safety testing done on complete formulations with these chemicals. And a lot of times in a single farming cycle, these farms use a couple of different complete formulations all at the same time. And if you use a lot of these formulations all at the same time, they actually create like a synergistic effect. So not only is one of them toxic, but if you combine two complete formulations together, 1 + 1 instead of equaling 2, like as Andre Leu would say, 1 + 1 would equal like 1,000 now. So they amplify their toxicity, okay? And again, no safety studies have been done on complete formulations at all or required to be done. And any safety studies done on active ingredients in isolation on its own in a complete formulated product is done by the chemical company, by their paid scientists in their labs, and then the reports are sent to like the FDA or CDC or whatever, stuff of that sort for evaluation. It's not even done by regulatory agencies. All these little things are important to consider when making a decision that's right for you, okay? So I buy at least organic fruits and vegetables because again, some people will say, yes, organic uses pesticides. Okay, but atrazine and Roundup are way different than soap and water, which is what's used in organic farming, or copper. That's what they put in your multivitamin, for example, or vinegar and water, or salt and water even. That's also used in organic farming. But again, if the organic farms do it right, you don't have to even use any of that stuff to begin with. And then obviously the third option in that category is like wild crops. Many people won't do this. If you're into foraging, it might be your thing. Might have to hire a foraging coach. So we got one question here. Is there a particular grocery store that should be avoided to buy meats? I usually get fresh cuts at Heb. Okay, so Rico, Heb is good, you know, but they sell like mainly from my observation, just like stereotypical factory farm meat, you know? Is that better than eating processed food and stuff like that? Yes, 100% better. Again, too simplified, but there is some credit to it. If you see like a single ingredient food, that's already great, you know? So just stick to just eating steak, just eating chicken, just eating, you know, the vegetable, the fruit, just drinking water, teas, etc. You're already doing amazing at that point. But if you want to take it a step above and beyond, then try to buy at least USDA organic certified. And if you want to take it even a step higher, get like pasture raised meats or wild game, stuff like that. So, okay. And then fats, obviously you can get a lot of fats from the animal fats, okay? Especially in fish. They're very rich in omega-3 fatty acids, which is a great anti-inflammatory. It's great for your skin. And it's great for a myriad of other biological functions, including brain health, etc., etc. But also you can have like avocados. They're also amazingly rich in good fats. Nuts, seeds. If you eat a wide variety of nuts and seeds per day, it's a great way to get your fiber in so you can stay very regular. But on top of that, dramatically decrease your chances of colon cancer as well, especially if you just stick with eating real food and kind of stay away from processed food in general. That's the big one. And try to stay away, unfortunately, from eating out too much. You know, I try not to eat out like at all because, again, they're just using, you don't know what they're putting in there. And a lot of times they're using a tremendous amount of those industrial seed oils, etc., etc. So not only is that going to ramp up your caloric intake for that meal, thus causing you to probably gain weight because most people are very inactive, but it's also going to cause a lot of inflammation. Who knows what else it's doing in your body. And the last thing I would recommend for nutrition, especially if you're busy, is you got to create those automated systems. And what I mean by that is create systems that don't require a lot of time for you to cook. So there are a lot of ways to go about this. Here's like what I do personally to save a lot of time is I get up, you know, around 6:30 or 7. I hang out, you know, drink some tea, usually like organic green tea to wake up. And then I go to the gym. I get home and basically I have already an idea of what I need to eat per day. Like I created an Excel chart that I use with a lot of my clients to make all this like very predictable. And then I just throw, like I have a metal plate, obviously, put some parchment paper on there, throw the meat on there, what I would need, throw the vegetables on there, throw that in the oven and have it cook. And then I have a rice cooker that I throw some potatoes in and have that boiling, like steaming. And as that's cooking, I kind of season it up a little bit, of course, but as that's cooking, I jump in the shower and get ready. And then by the time I'm done with the shower, all my meals are done for the day. And then I just pack it up in 3 glass containers. I try to avoid plastic all the time when it's touching your food. And I eat the first one right away, and then the other 2 are ready to go for the day. And that saves a tremendous amount of time because if you get in a habit of cooking every single meal, you got to kind of unpack everything, you know, put it out, pack it back up, etc., etc. And it's quite time consuming, you know, and thus the more time your goals take to achieve, the less likely you are to do it long term, especially if you have like a very busy schedule. That's important to remember. Okay, so I hope this was helpful, guys. Check out those websites, totally good resources. Also have my book here. Honestly gave you the resources there, but if you guys want to support me, you're welcome to. Totally don't have to, but it's there for you, okay? And I have great picture illustrations so you guys can see, you know, it's not dense reading. It just tells you like which logos to look for, what to stay away from, etc., etc., how factory farm beef looks, how pasture-raised beef looks, all that stuff. I've also been a guest on a bunch of podcasts talking about this subject, so if it interests you, check that out. Literally give away the information completely for free because I just want to see you guys be healthy and happy, you know? And it's much easier to do so when, first and foremost, you make your mental and physical health a top priority, because if it's not, that's always going to hold you back. But then also if you have the right education too. So those two things need to be at play, and then you can make the right decisions for yourself and create a sustainable, happy, and healthy life. Okay? All right, guys. So wishing you the best. Have a great weekend, okay? It was good to see all of you. Take care.